All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody for joining us this afternoon. We have a great conversation lined up for you all about messaging and supportive housing week. And before we jump into all of that content, just a quick note for participants about the recording today and how it intends to be used. We also just want to highlight that for anyone using an AI note taker, we do not allow those in. So if you did turn that on, it has been removed from today's recording, but we will make the information available to you after today's call. So with that, let's jump in. I'm so excited to share with you what we'll be talking about together. You'll have a time and opportunity to meet us at CSH and learn a little bit more about who we are if you don't know us already. You'll learn about Supportive Housing Week. Perhaps you've joined us on one of our earlier calls or have already downloaded some of our amazing resources, but you'll get another high-level overview. And then we're going to jump into the heart of today's discussion about messaging and why that matters, and how to use that messaging for our members of Congress, and how to highlight information in a way that is particularly important to them and that they will hear. We're also going to highlight some new resources for you and give you a preview of what's to come and how else you can get involved. And so with that, let's just do a quick round of introductions of our CSH team. So I am Kara Mergel. I'm the Director for Policy and Government Affairs. I'm really excited to be chatting with all of you today, and even more excited about the amazing Supportive Housing Week that we have happening later in August. With that, I will hand it over to Jesse.
Thank you, Kara. My name is Jesse Dean. I'm Director of Strategic Communications here at CSH, and I'll pass it over to Melanie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie Kirshen. I am the Associate Director of Strategic Communications at CSH. Now I'm going to hand it back to Kara.
Wonderful. Thank you. So if you don't know us at CSH, we are a national not-for-profit focused on creating homes and delivering services for individuals with disabilities to make sure they have the resources they need to thrive in their communities. Since 1991, we have invested more than $2.2 billion and created or preserved more than 512 supportive housing units. We provide technical assistance and consulting and policy support. Anything that you can think of related to supportive housing, we are your go-to resource. So a little bit about Supportive Housing Week. So if you have not heard about Supportive Housing Week yet, I like to think of Supportive Housing Week as a Hill Day in reverse, or a Capitol Day in reverse. You may have done this with members of Congress or in your states, where you go to the Capitol or you go to DC to educate your members of Congress or educate your state lawmakers around particular issues. And this is just like that, except it is in reverse, meaning it's going to take place in their home districts while Congress is on recess in the month of October. We have designated, it is particularly a way to show Congress how supportive housing works. So we have designated the week of August 24th as the first ever Supportive Housing Week. We are hoping to make this an annual event, so there'll be plenty of opportunities to stay involved. It is a great opportunity to meet with your members of Congress and provide them an opportunity to see firsthand how supportive housing works in their communities. It's also an opportunity to build relationships between them, providers, residents, so that as issues affecting our tenants and supportive housing comes up in Congress, they know who to call and who they can look to ask questions and build a plan on how to respond. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jesse to talk about our Supportive Housing Week framework.
Yeah, thank you again, Kara. I'm really excited to have you participating in Supportive Housing Week and joining us today. And I'm also really excited to walk you through our messaging framework. We built our messaging framework from messaging and narrative research that we conducted last year with Housing Narrative Lab. They're a national narrative and communications firm dedicated to building public support for housing solutions. And they do that through research, training, and education, storytelling, and coalition. So, what you're hearing today is really timely to support not only Supportive Housing Week, but we hope that this research data will help inform you on how you can communicate most effectively, not only with your members, but also with community members. And I really like this quote from Housing Narrative Lab because what's highlighted in orange is that when we communicate, it's really about saying things in a way that people can hear. And when we're approaching members of Congress, they're coming to supportive housing. They may have no knowledge. They may have a little knowledge. They may have heard negative things around supportive housing. So they're all coming at a different place. And so our job as communicators, as messengers, is to be sure that we understand where they are at that moment and how we can communicate the best possible way so that so they can hear. And I'll just walk you quickly through the messaging research that I mentioned that we conducted last year. So our first goal was to learn, what does the public understand supportive housing to be? Do they even know supportive housing? And to our knowledge, and if anyone knows differently, please correct me, but this is the first ever national narrative research specifically on supportive housing. So we as CSH wanted to know where were people's level of understanding on supportive housing. So that was our first goal. And then we wanted to use those findings to support you on this call and that the supportive housing can use in their work. So the research happened in 3 phases. The first phase was a series of focus groups across the country to gauge a baseline level of understanding of supportive housing and what issues were important. Then we partnered with a national polling firm to conduct a national polling of 1,200 respondents with an oversampling of Black and Hispanic respondents of 200. And these respondents are representative of the country. And quite interestingly, the respondents in terms of their political identification was pretty evenly split across liberal, moderate, and conservative persons who identified politically. So that was very helpful in our research, so we could understand where people were and what messages resonated with folks across the political spectrum. And then the third phase of the research tested what we learned from the national polling to identify the key messages that resonated with folks across the political spectrum. And this is really important, right? Why? Because as you are hosting those site tours with your members of Congress, they represent the variety and the diversity of the political spectrum. And so we're really excited to share the research results with you. Now, the first key finding, which I think many of you will be pleased to hear, is that across all of those 3 audiences, there was a broad level of baseline level support. In fact, 9 out of 10 people support the idea of affordable housing as the solution, affordable housing paired with services as the solution to homelessness. So across all political ideologies, people got it. They understood that is important. They also, about 4 out of 5, support government funding to solve homelessness and housing insecurity. That was a really exciting finding, that people do understand that for a segment of the population who are homeless, saw housing and support services as a good solution, and that they supported government funding. And the top reason across all audiences for them to support that was because of supportive housing combines affordable housing with tailored support, and they really were getting it, and so that was really encouraging to us. The What we discovered, though, the other key finding was that there's a cynicism problem. People worried across the board that people were taking advantage of supportive housing, that people were getting services and housing who didn't need it. And it tapped into that familiar critique of waste, fraud, and abuse. And so that cynicism really feeds into that. So that summarizes some of the key findings. I'm going to share some of the messages that the top messages that resonated with folks when we did that third phase of the message testing to see what persuaded. But one finding that was really I think eye-opening for us, and not too surprising for us who are communicators, but that generally when we're communicating about supportive housing, that we really need to know who we're speaking to. And remember that quote I shared at the first, we need to know and meet them where they are. And again, they may have some understanding, little understanding, or no understanding, or maybe they have a biased understanding because what they're hearing in the media. So that one size fits all message, like all of us, I remember back in the day when I first started in communications, we had our talking points and we had our flyer, and we just shared that to anyone that we met. But that one size fits all does not work, especially in the current environment. And the other finding was that the same two core messages, like a resident story, like if we can highlight a success story, and pairing that with shifting resources to what works, really worked across the political spectrum. And so your job when you're helping to host these tours is really to match the framing of what you communicate to that member, not using your flyer of your talking points, but understanding, where's this member at, and then how can we use how can we develop our messaging so it'll resonate with them, and quite honestly, let the tour do the talking, and let that experience influence them. So what we found through this project, and with our additional collaboration with the Housing Narrative Lab, was that really what was key when you're thinking about when you're researching about the member, and I think Kara is going to share a little bit more about that in a bit, but really the key was to focus on values. What is important to them? And I think for all of us, we have shared values, right? And so that's pretty easy because we all value safety. We all value stability. We value community. We value common sense, and we value, well, I'm super frugal, but we value things that are cost effective. And so that is something that I think, regardless of someone's political affiliation, we can find common ground there. And so that's really what was a really salient point that came out through this whole project, is that it's not about using terms that we are familiar with. Even supportive housing sometimes isn't the right term to use. Housing first isn't the right term to use. Rather, start at a place where we have those shared values. So, and just advancing effective messaging strategy that we wanted to share with you, that's been really powerful for us in our communication, particularly in the past year or so, is to show the cost comparison. When you show the data visually that supportive housing, on average, nationally, costs $72 a day per household versus $131 to incarcerate someone, or $1,200 to hospitalize someone, those cost comparisons can be very powerful in uh, as making a case for supportive housing as a cost-effective solution. Um, and and again, that supports the key message that resonated with people across the political spectrum, which was shifting resources to what works. And so that framing is really powerful. And when you can compare that with the visualization of the cost savings, then that can be very powerful. And these are probably uh, pretty obvious to a lot of us, but we do wanted to share some common pitfalls that we suggest you avoid when you're creating your messaging for the site tours, and just generally. So look, you may have a second person or a third person review the content to see, is there a lot of jargon in here? Is there a lot of wonky language that describes supportive housing, or is there opportunities to adjust that language so it's just talking in plain language that we talk the way that we talk every day at the kitchen table? Um, are we offering too much information and often over explaining what supportive housing is, instead of just going back to the values and the outcomes that supportive housing produces for the community? Is there insider language there? Even housing first and supportive housing are insider language, right? When we're talking to someone who might not have any understanding of supportive housing, using those terms, they're going to be like, "What? What? I'm not quite sure what you mean there." So, framing it in a way that it's affordable housing paired with support services, and there's, if you can be specific about what those supportive services are: mental health services, substance use disorder services, job training services, then that clicks for people and they get it. There's the use persuasive language, and we're sharing, and I'll share a few more language that the research that we did in the third phase were persuasive messages. It got people to rethink what supportive housing was and to get them to support it a little bit more. And of course, we always say at CSH, we like to communicate in a nonpartisan fashion, and so being cognizant of who you're speaking with and avoiding anything that is directly partisan. So, based on our findings, here are some words we thought we would share that you can replace and embrace. So things like supportive housing as needed, or stable, affordable housing, or stable housing combined with services, supportive housing for people with complex or different needs, instead of permanent supportive housing, or things like non-time limited housing, or housing first. And actually, the research the research showed that the word permanent, when we attach that to supportive housing, and that, let me tell you, we all say PSH, we use permanent supportive housing. It's codified in HUD nomenclature, but that the extra word permanent really it drew down the support of supportive housing when that word was attached to it. Because for those who were a little bit cynical, who were a little concerned about someone taking advantage of supportive housing, the idea that it's permanent forever, then they were less likely to support it. And then thinking about the services component. So I know there's a lot of text on here. I apologize, but and I will say, so communications 101, we always were taught, be concise, don't use too many words. But sometimes what we found is using more words instead of trying to be so concise was actually better. And if we could name the services, if we could name the people that were being benefited from supportive housing, that went a long way in helping people understand what it is, and to garner their support. So saying things like support services like job training, counseling, mental health, and drug use treatment can help someone find and secure a home. Instead of supportive services with wraparound services. The wraparound services, I will also say, that's kind of insider language, right? We use that a lot in the sector, but when we did our message testing, people didn't know what wraparound services was. What does that mean generally? So that was an interesting finding for us, and people like the idea that services were tailored based on what people's needs were. And we know that at times you'll have to respond to tough questions. So we just wanted to share some tips on if a member that is on the tour may throw out a question that throws you a little bit off balance. These are some tips. So acknowledge the question, stay respectful, even if your viewpoints differ. And the important thing is bridge back to the outcomes. And that was really important in our research findings, was that highlighting the outcomes instead of the exact phrasing of supportive housing or housing first, instead of focusing on those, and instead of saying affordable housing and services help people help break the cycle of homelessness, it shifted resources to what works. That was more powerful than relying on the naming specific phrases like supportive housing. Using local examples, that personal story ranked high. In fact, the personal story of someone succeeding in supportive housing, it broke their cycle. They have been stable. They've been able to reconnect with their families. Those type of stories were super powerful. So find those, get them, and share them as much as possible. Of course, this is not an advocacy effort, as Kara said previously, and this is really an education effort. So we want to avoid opportunities to get into political debates. And if frankly, we all like to feel like we're smart, but hey, if we don't know the answer, just say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. Let me get back to you. So those were some tips that we wanted to share regarding tough questions. And the messaging guidance and the framing that I talked through today are just highlighted. We're going to share that in this document here today, and we'll put the link in the chat, and we'll also share it to you by email following this presentation. And I think I'm turning it back to Kara.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jesse. So we want to take everything that Jesse just talked about and apply it to, what do I say to my member depending on who they are and their political leanings, and how can I do that? And we know that advocacy and education really does start with knowing your audience, right? And so who you're talking to and any member's particular political orientation can provide you clues with what message, what values, outcomes, and voices will be most impactful and persuasive to those individuals. So let's start with, we're going to group it into sort of three buckets of sort of political persuasion to think about. So if you're going through this, I want you to think about who you might be engaging with. What party do they belong to? What are the types of things that they like or don't like? And if you're not sure of that, we're going to help you figure that out. So the first bucket is the progressive or left-leaning message. So a couple of key things to consider when talking to them, and key messages are things like, no matter our race, gender, or income, we all need a safe place to call home, or housing is a human right. Good messengers to bring into these discussions with yourself are, of course, people with lived experience, homeless service providers, supportive housing or homeless coalitions, equity-focused organizations, but folks that would really resonate with those members. thinking about alignment. So these are usually individuals who are part of a socialist Democrat or mainstream Democrat alignment. You might be thinking of, like, you have a Bernie Sanders type who is sort of very progressive, maybe compared to Tina Smith, who's more moderate, but still Democrat, right? Still sort of aligning in this way. They're typically members that focus on poverty or equity, and you might find them in certain caucuses. So caucuses are just sort of clubs, if you will, dedicated around a special interest or something that's important. And so you might find these members in the homelessness caucus or the progressive caucus. Moving into the moderate members of Congress. So key messaging here shifts a little bit. So this, you might say, it's time to shift our resources to what works best, or supportive housing is a proven solution to help people with disabilities get into and stay housed. Once again, your good messengers here are people with lived experience. You might also think about your state agencies, like your housing finance agency, who can talk to the financing side of it, and really thinking about some of the costs that are put forward. You might think about other local and state lawmakers who might be putting their own local or city or county budget towards solutions as well, and bring a particular lens to this. And you might also think about healthcare leaders. We obviously understand the intersection of supportive housing and health. And these are other folks that would be valuable messengers in this space. So who fits in this bucket? Well, really centrists in both the Democrat and Republican Party. How do you know who those folks are? Well, these are typically individuals who do a lot of co-sponsorship, meaning they might introduce a bill that is also co-introduced with a member of the opposite party, showing solidarity on an issue. So I'm going to give an example. If you've heard recently, there's been a lot of talk about the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, which was passed with a lot of bipartisan support, but was initially introduced and co-sponsored by a Democrat and a Republican. These might also be members who are at risk of losing their seat in purple districts. So your purple districts, of course, kind of can swing either way in an election cycle. We know a lot of members are up for re-election this year. It is a midterm year. And for those of you that live in purple states or purple districts, you might think about if your members sit in this space, and how they sort of fit within sort of the Democrat versus Republican leaning, and maybe they just fall into this moderate space. Where you might also be able to find some of these individuals, believe it or not, there is a caucus in Congress, I love this, called the Bipartisan Problem Solvers. That just, to me, sounds like a congressional version of like Nancy Drew. Like, I just really want to be a part of that group. But they could be members of that caucus. There's also a former mayor's caucus that has a lot of bipartisan members because they have this deep experience having run large cities, medium cities, and bring this sort of collaborative approach to the conversation. And then, of course, our final bucket is the conservative or right-leaning bucket. So key messaging here is supportive housing is a cost-effective solution that reduces reliance on hospitals, jails, and it creates better use of taxpayer dollars while improving outcomes. So this isn't always about, I think we have a tendency to say cost savings, and we know that cost savings is, one thing, and sort of automatically approaching a Republican to say this is going to save money is both important and nuanced. So it is really about a better, more responsible shift of funding into this resource that has better outcomes. And going back to some of those data points that Jesse shared earlier, when we look at the cost of one day in a jail, one day in a hospital, and one day in supportive housing. And as he mentioned too, and I just want to reinforce, if you have that data locally, it is really, really powerful data. I've seen it time and time again. And you may adapt it. It may be that your jail data, there we go, that your jail data, there may not be jail data costs, but there might be prison data. There might not be emergency room costs, ER costs, but there might be psychiatric hospital costs, right? So see what's available to you. And you can do a day-by-day comparison, or you can do, which we also see this is very powerful, where you could say 1 week in psychiatric hospital is the same amount as 3 months in jail, is the same amount as 1 year in supportive housing. So either breakdown becomes really effective, just to show again that key idea of shifting costs to things that are more effective. So who are possible messengers here in this space? Once again, your people with lived experience. Stories are incredibly important to this group of individuals as well, and your members of Congress, to just understand real impact. Also, faith leaders in your community, business leaders in your community. Law enforcement, we see a lot of law enforcement step into these spaces who see the value in supportive housing and become really good messengers for this work as well. This is another place with thinking about housing developers and investors or landlords, and also veterans organizations. And where can you find these members? So in thinking about congressional alignment here, these are usually your fiscal or social conservatives. They're often focused on government efficiency. So coming back to sort of those cost offset conversations, and also local control is really important to them. So saying, making it clear about the strategies that are unique to what your local community needs are, their community needs are. And that is really important for really addressing them on that level. These are individuals that you might find in the law enforcement caucus or the Republican Study Committee. So if you are hearing this and thinking, well, if I don't know this about my member, how do I find out who they are and what they are so that I can tailor my messaging? Each member does have a .gov profile website. So if it is a House member, it's usually like House member name .house.gov. And on the Senate side, it's Senate member name .senate.gov. This is a place that at least at minimum will provide background on individuals. So from this, you can discern what are their values, what do they find important. Often they'll have a little section that has their key areas of interest. And so you might find for somebody that is right-leaning that it says government efficiency, fiscal responsibility. For somebody that is in a more progressive caucus, you might see that they have an area of interest that is housing as a human rights, right? So that is a key place. Oftentimes in these spaces, you can also see what committees they're a part of and what caucuses they're a part of. So similar to highlighting those caucuses here, seeing what caucus they are a part of will often point to some of the values that they align with or an identity that they align with. And that can also help you think about framing and messaging. This is also a very large election year. So a lot of these members might also have a campaign website where they also are sharing their platform, being very clear about their values, being very clear about future changes they want to see if they were to be reelected. And that is another place where you can find information like this. And there's also, just sort of these like one-off places that if you're a super political nerd like me, if you Google things like, what are the chances that this person is going to win the election? There's just these sort of political sites that will give you deep dives into these sort of things too. And you can usually just Google questions like that, and those types of things will come up. So these are all quick spaces that if you're not sure what's going to resonate as we're talking today with your member of Congress, places you can go to learn a little bit more, sort of connect those dots on values, interests, political leaning, and then come up with your messaging for engagement. The other thing that we just want to highlight, and Jesse touched a little bit on some of these concepts, but want to just get under them a little bit more with you, are tips for remaining nonpartisan. So we do see this as an advocacy and engagement opportunity. We know that in other instances, you may be going to, as I referred to earlier, this as a Hill Day in reverse. And a lot of Hill days, you are taking your very specific political ask. We want you to do this. We want you to do that. We believe this is the right policy and this is the wrong policy. That is not the intention of these visits. These are really, really focused on helping members, again, to see supportive housing in action. With everything that's going on in Congress right now, we need to make sure that they really, really understand how this works in their community. And then we have an opportunity to go back to them and say, we would love you to do this. We would love you to support this now that you have that moment. And just for like a very real life example, we did an internal version last year of what has now become Supportive Housing Week. And it was just working with CSH staff, and we targeted about 5 Republican members of the House. And we got meetings with 4 of them. And when the debate was happening around the continuum of care, and we were on Capitol Hill saying, please, you have to do this, you have to do that, there was a letter that was circulated amongst House Republicans that was sent to HUD that basically said, HUD, please slow your roll. And it was signed by only Republicans, and it was signed by all 4 of the Republicans that we did site visits with last August. After we did those site visits, we had a warm relationship. They understood this work in their community. And when we went to them and said, we think this is really important, and we connected it back to their values. For example, we did work with a representative in Michigan. And what was really important to him was mental health. He had mental health that was in his family that he saw how it impacted individuals. So when he understood that supportive housing really helped people with disabilities, including mental health, that was a light bulb for him. So when we went back to him and we said, we would love for you to sign this letter and talk to HUD to tell them how important this is, without question, without delay, he signed that letter. And we had that experience, all 4 of the members that we met with. So for those of you that are like, why aren't we taking an ask? We need to warm them up. They need to understand. They need to see how this really works in their community. And it's not the end of the conversation. It is the first step of the conversation. And so keeping these conversations at a nonpartisan level, taking out policy debate, and really focusing on impact and community is what's going to be most impactful during Supportive Housing Week. So with that in mind, it's important to avoid references to specific political figures, parties, or ideology. If there is a question about a specific person in a party or a recent administrative action coming out of the White House or coming out of HUD, you can acknowledge it. And we encourage you to keep it positive and redirect the conversation back to the educational moment at hand and sort of help the member to understand this thing that is happening or this person, what this person said, this is what it means in your community, instead of getting into a debate about whether that person or that action was right or wrong. It's also important to stay focused on the outcomes, again, using your evidence, using your resident success stories, and really about the community impact so that the member sees that this is their backyard. This is happening right where they live. Again, Jesse said this earlier, it's important enough to repeat that it's about emphasizing shared goals, housing stability, independence, public safety, and responsible use of taxpayer dollars. And it's also important to reinforce supportive housing as a practical community-based solution that benefits both individuals and public systems. So that, just with that in mind, is a way to keep it focused on the goal of the week and avoid any sort of debates that take us off topic. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Melanie to talk about our new resources.
Thank you so much, Kara. And thanks, Jesse, before that. So yeah, we're going to talk about new resources. But before we do that, and I think I'm going to go one more slide forward and then come back to this. But we wanted to take a quick poll of all of you. And we really want to know, are you planning a supportive housing activity or site visit? And the options are, yes, we are all set and confirmed. Yes, we are finalizing our plans. Maybe, is there still time? And then no, it just didn't work out this year. So we just wanted to get a feel for the room. Okay. We've got some diversity of responses going. This is cool. I like this. Maybe, is there still time? Emphasis. That's great. If you haven't already, please do participate in that poll. We'll give it another second. Yeah, great. We've got a few confirmed. Got some finalizing their plans. That's awesome. It's been hovering around 57. Yeah, let's end the poll and see where people are at. Let's do it. Okay, so yeah, so we've got a decent amount of you said maybe is there still time, or no, you couldn't do it this year. That's okay. There's plenty of ways to also engage. For those of you who are finalizing your plans, or for those of you who are all set, we wanted to continue to share our toolkit that we're building out with resources to help make this as easy as possible for you. So our newest one that we're pretty much launching right now is essentially a plug and play template that provides an overview of supportive housing, including the needs in your state. There's links in this document to all the data that you might need to be able to fill it in for like specifically your area, targeting your member of Congress. There's a lot of background on supportive housing financing, which is of course important, especially to those members of the Appropriations Committee and the other committees. There's a section dedicated specifically to, relevant activities in your members' district, so you can take advantage of some of the stuff that Kara was talking about in terms of specializing this. There's a chart of federal resources coming into the community. And like I said, it's got all the data that you might need. So you can easily just download this. All the sections that are highlighted, you can replace it with your relevant information, your members' relevant information. And you can use that to engage with your member of Congress. And, you could use this without even necessarily having the site visit, but maybe later at some point you have a conversation with them or you meet with their office or something like that. You can always use this then. So that's great. And then we want to just point to the other, another great resource that we have, and I will drop a link to the chat in the chat as well. of our social media toolkit. So this is super great for those of you who said, maybe is there still time to get involved? Or for those of you who said you weren't able to do it this year, we still want to spread the message that supportive housing works, right? And really just amplifying that message across social media. So if you're a communication staff member who's on this call, or you have communication staff members, or not, if you just want to talk about how supportive housing works on your own personal channels, we have made it again as easy as possible for you. So you can go to that link that's in the chat, and it has graphics that you can download and use on your different platforms. We've got different sizes to fit different social media channels. And it's really just about educating folks about, why supportive housing is so great and why it works. So we really encourage you to do that, no matter what. And then here's just a list of some additional resources that we've got. Like I said, a lot of them are very specific to those of you who are hosting a site visit. So the invitation guide, a planning checklist. We talked about these earlier, but our talking points, that social media toolkit I talked about. And then also we have a story banking template to help gather some additional stories from some of your residents or tenants or other folks who are living in supportive housing. And, we've got more things coming in the next few weeks leading up to the day, which is a briefing packet, a run of show, and thank you letters. And everything is available at that link that's there, which is csh.org/shweek. And everything now is available for you to just click and download and use as you need. And then let me go to the next slide. So how to join Supportive Housing Week. Let me see. So those of you who did say that you were planning a site visit or a local engagement, send us an email confirming that you have scheduled that with your member of Congress or their member or their staff member, and we will send you free swag. We have some cool stuff like t-shirts and buttons and a few other things that we can share with you. But you got to email us and give us your, information and whether or not you're planning, who that member is, and what your shipping address is. And again, like we've kind of been saying throughout this whole thing, is that, although we are concentrating on this specific week in August, we do want this to have life beyond this, right? Because supportive housing is something that folks need all year round, not just this particular week in August. Although we're taking advantage of the fact that our members of Congress are in their home districts, they're also going to be back in October in their home districts. So, maybe that's a chance to try to get a site visit then. And, you could always hit us up again and just be like, hey, help us out, things like that. Or the resources and the tools that we've created do have that longevity, right? That you can use them for a site visit in October or September or, whenever it makes sense for you. So we do encourage you to think about this beyond just that week. We're just trying to kind of use that time to create and build momentum in that particular time. So with that, I am going to, so that we've got our next steps. Like we said, we're going to be sharing out the materials from today's webinar to everybody who registered and attended our webinar. We do encourage you to still, if you're not already, to sign up on that csh.org/shweek so that you can get our concentrated emails. And also if, things come up in the future, like I said, beyond the August 24th to the 28th week. And with that, I'm going to open it up to any questions that folks might have. Feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Okay, I see a hand raised. Alejandro, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, hi, this is Alex Medina from the Coalition for Responsible Community Development here in Los Angeles. Um, Quick question for you guys. If you guys are in the same area as us, you guys want to be involved as much as possible. So if we get a site visit, like we're in Los Angeles, you guys are in Los Angeles. Would you guys want to come along, or do you want to just sort of be it us leading it by ourselves, or do you, like I said, want to be involved in any way?
That is a great question. And we are definitely encouraging people to run with this on their own. Now, if you have a relationship with our LA office, feel free to shoot them a note and say, hey, we got this going. You want to join? And work that out with them. But
Cool.
for those of you that don't have local CSH offices or may not know someone in your local CSH office, these materials are designed to be completely done and empower you without CSH. So either way, if you have that relationship, feel free to reach out. If not, feel empowered to run with it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else? Okay.
I just want to comment on Alex's question too. We'll be sharing. I'm hoping by next week we'll share templates for engaging media and some guidelines around that. So if this is an opportunity to highlight the visit through public relations, we'll share some guidelines around that. We want to be careful because we want to make sure that the site visit happens, and that's the priority. But some members are like to tout their community engagement, so we'll have some information, again, guidelines around that, and also some template media releases.
And of course, if folks have questions after this call, we do encourage you to send us an email at the email we dropped in the chat, which is the shweek@csh.org. And we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Um, with that, I'm going to thank my colleagues, Kara and Jesse, and just encourage all of you to stay in touch with us, to visit that site as we continue to add new resources throughout the month of August. Follow us on social media and, definitely use the hashtag of supportive housing works or SH Week as well, if you don't like a long hashtag, which is totally understandable. And tag us and we'll repost your stuff. So thanks everybody. Good luck with all of your efforts. And have a great weekend.